The instant Belle Thornwick resolved that my family's lake, held for a century, was now the property of her prized son was the moment she declared war on a rancher she shouldn't have crossed. It was 6:00 a.m. when 3 police cruisers came roaring up my driveway, the gravel shooting out from beneath their tires with the intensity of automatic weapon fire, the scent of diesel fumes mingled with the aroma of the still-hot coffee in my hand. And there she was, the HOA president, recording the entire scene from her immaculate Range Rover, looking on with sheer delight as officers swarmed my front porch. Her accusation? That I was trespassing on property my great-grandfather had homesteaded back in 1887. Her son, an Instagram influencer, had been pocketing $200 a head from strangers to fish on my private lake, the very same waters that hold my grandmother's ashes. Then this quintessential Karen produced fabricated documents alleging I was unlawfully denying the community access. However, Belle had made a single, crucial miscalculation. She was entirely unaware that I held the purse strings for every single service that kept her flawless little subdivision operational. Leave a comment below. Have you ever felt the urge to utterly dismantle someone who attempted to take what belongs to your family? And please share where you are tuning in from. It brings me great joy to see my ranch community extending all over the nation. My name is Garrett Holloway, and this is the account of how a suburban HOA president made an attempt to seize my family's heritage and discovered why you never provoke a rancher who is well-versed in his rights. This is 2,400 acres of Montana heaven, hewn from the wild by my great-grandfather Augustus in 1887, that includes the 12-acre spring-fed lake where he erected our first cabin. It is the place where 4 generations of Holloways have entered the world, grown up, and been laid to their final rest. The steam from my morning coffee blends with the crisp mountain air. The leather of my saddle groans under my weight. Meadowlarks sing out across the pastures. This is more than just property. It's our heritage. When Grandma Eleanor passed away 3 years ago, we released her ashes at dusk in the spot where she often shelled peas while observing her grandkids swim on quiet evenings. The sound of the water lapping against those smooth stones seems to echo with her laughter. I am 45, divorced, and have been living by myself since my daughter Skylar went to college. I've been working this land since I was old enough to handle the reins, and I intend to die here. I never foresaw some HOA matriarch waging war on everything my family had established. 5 years ago, the landscape changed. A developer purchased the neighboring parcel, vowing rural harmony while packing 200 McMansions onto lots the size of postage stamps. They named it Whispering Pines Estates. Foolishly, I granted them an emergency vehicle access easement, simply trying to be a good neighbor. That was the moment Belle Thornwick crept into my life like a rattlesnake cloaked in designer brands. In her late 40s, with blonde highlights that likely cost more than my feed bill for a month. She drives a Range Rover that has never touched a speck of real dirt. A real estate agent married to some bank vice president. She's the type who says agriculture as if it were a contagious illness. Her grievances began almost immediately. The smell of cattle was disrupting her dinner parties. My native prairie grasses were an eyesore from her kitchen window. Could I perhaps mow them to make things look more professional? I just laughed. That was a big mistake. Then her darling son Tucker found my lake, at 22. This Instagram influencer, possessing the work ethic of a flattened squirrel, began bringing his friends over for content creation. A term I apply very loosely. Diesel trucks would clatter down my access road at sunrise, beer bottles would sparkle among the cattails, and electronic music would overpower the bird songs that had existed long before his lineage began. But what started as tolerance soon escalated to trespassing, and trespassing evolved into a business venture. With professional cameras and buzzing drones, Tucker was charging $300 for exclusive Montana wilderness access. He posted about my family's private lake as if it were an inheritance from his own great-great-grandfather. The reek of his entitlement was more offensive than fresh manure. That was when Belle unleashed what she believed to be her winning move. An evening knock, a manila folder, that condescending smile that makes your skin crawl. "Garrett, I've conducted some historical research," she said, her voice dripping with feigned concern. The original homestead papers included recreational water rights for township residents. She laid out photocopied documents on my kitchen table, her manicured nails pointing to what looked like official county clerk stamps. We must honor community traditions. Having reviewed countless legal documents over the years, I could identify an amateur forgery. Her papers made reference to Whispering Pines Township, which was amusing since her subdivision was not established until 2019. My great-grandfather's homestead was 132 years older. Yet, I recalled my grandfather's wisdom. When someone presents you with fake papers, let them believe you're buying it while you collect proof of their deceit. I'll have to go over these with my lawyer, I stated, taking photos of each page. Her smile wavered. Surely, that's not necessary, we're all neighbors here. The coffee in my mug was now cold outside. The cattle were settling in for the night, their lowing sounds drifting across the land my ancestors had poured their blood into building. I was staring at a woman in my kitchen, amidst 4 generations of memories, attempting to steal our most hallowed place with counterfeit documents, but Belle had committed her first grave error. She mistook kindness for weakness. She equated rural with unintelligent. She believed some simple country rancher wouldn't know how to retaliate. She was on the verge of discovering that Montana ranchers not only understand the land, we understand the law, and when someone tries to rob you of your heritage with forged papers, you don't merely defend your ground, you annihilate them. Belle wasted no time in transforming her fake documents into a cudgel. She then proceeded to mobilize the entire county bureaucracy against me. A couple of weeks later, County Inspector Martinez was at my door, looking profoundly embarrassed. Sorry, Garrett. I've received a formal complaint about illegal water access restrictions. A lady called headquarters 3 times, insisting on immediate action. We toured the property together, with Martinez shaking his head. This is absolute horseshit. Your paperwork is flawless. The boundaries are unmistakable. There are no violations whatsoever. Nevertheless, he was obligated to file an official report. She's manufacturing a paper trail, framing this as a persistent dispute. It's actually clever, diabolical, but clever. The true blow came next. Belle convened a community safety meeting at her clubhouse. About 15 neighbors attended, mostly new arrivals who had never set foot on a working ranch. Belle stood at the front with large aerial photographs, gesturing as if she were a general briefing for battle. This man's livestock are poisoning our children's watershed, she proclaimed, her voice saturated with maternal worry. His increasingly hostile behavior towards families utilizing traditional recreational areas points to severe mental instability. We relocated here for a peaceful rural lifestyle, not to be intimidated by some feudal rancher who acts like he owns the whole valley. The falsehoods were infuriating, but the financial rumors were more painful. Whispers spread that inheritance taxes had left me broke, that the ranch was on the brink of failure, and that I would sell to developers any month now in ranching country, implying a man can't manage his finances is a direct attack on his character. It was time to retaliate. My grandfather always taught that the strongest shield against liars is an overwhelming amount of documentation. Consequently, I engaged the county's premier surveyor, Martinez's brother-in-law, for GPS boundary mapping. It was $800 well invested when those satellite coordinates showed that Belle's immaculate fence was encroaching 3 feet onto my property for a stretch of 200 yards. Then came the security cameras. I installed 8 high-definition units equipped with night vision and cloud backup, covering every inch of the lake access. The sound of steel posts being driven into the hard Montana soil with the post-hole digger was like a drumbeat signaling the start of a battle. But I also recalled learning about adverse possession laws during my divorce. Continuous trespassing for 5 years could potentially establish a legal claim to property. Each day I allowed Tucker's circus to go on. I was possibly forfeiting my rights. The cameras would record everything, but more importantly, they would serve as proof that I was actively protecting my land. Within a few days, they captured something invaluable. On a Saturday morning, Tucker showed up with a complete film crew, lights, boom mics, even a catering truck. They were filming a commercial for an energy drink, set against the backdrop of authentic Montana wilderness. The recorded audio was priceless. I heard Tucker tell the director, "Yeah, this is my family's lake. I've been coming here since I was a kid." This was a complete fabrication. The kid was born in Phoenix and had only moved here 5 years ago. But as I reviewed more footage, I discovered something that sent a chill down my spine. Tucker wasn't just being dishonest about ownership. He was conducting a full-blown commercial enterprise. His Instagram followers had surged to 50,000 after a video he posted of the hidden paradise went viral. Now, dozens of aspiring influencers were paying him $300 apiece for exclusive access to the Montana lake. Every weekend, cars would line the county road. Strangers would trek through my pastures, leaving behind trash and agitating The cattle, the smell of abandoned camping equipment mingled with the scent of pine. Shards of broken beer bottles lay like landmines in the grass where my livestock fed. My prize bull, Augustus, named after my great-grandfather, had lost his appetite. The stress on the cattle from the constant human presence was impacting the entire herd. These were not just casual weekend photographers. This was industrial-scale exploitation of my family's most sacred land. Then came the minor twist that altered the course of everything. Tucker's latest Instagram post featured him constructing a rustic fishing dock at his family's traditional spot. The only problem was, he had built it on my property without my consent and was charging his clients an extra fee for the authentic experience. The time-lapse video of the construction had garnered 30,000 likes and was still climbing. However, I had every moment of that construction recorded on my cameras, including audio of Tucker detailing his profit margins to his film crew, commercial trespassing, property damage, and fraud. All meticulously documented with his own commentary. That evening, as I sat on my porch sipping whiskey while the cattle settled for the night, I came to a realization. Belle had made a fundamental error in judgment. She assumed that a simple country rancher wouldn't know how to engage in suburban warfare. She equated a rural lifestyle with ignorance, believing I would simply capitulate to her fabricated documents and feigned tears. She was about to discover that Montana ranchers are knowledgeable not just about land and livestock, but also about law, politics, and the art of turning documentation into a weapon of destruction. Her son's social media empire was built on a stolen foundation, and foundations can be demolished much faster than they are built, especially when you are the one in control of the demolition. Belle's subsequent action demonstrated that. She had learned absolutely nothing from observing her son's documented misdeeds unfold on my security cameras. 3 neighbors appeared at my door the following Tuesday. The Hendersons, the Patels, and a new family whose name I hadn't yet learned. They all looked extremely uncomfortable, shuffling their feet like children being compelled to make an apology. "Garrett, we are submitting a joint nuisance complaint," Henderson muttered, avoiding my gaze. "The HOA claims that your cattle operations are in violation of our subdivision's rural residential harmony standards." I had known Henderson for 3 years. He was a decent man who had helped me corral stray cattle when they wandered onto the county road. But Belle had somehow gotten to him. "What exactly is the nuisance, Bob?" "Well, it's the smell. And the noise. The early morning sounds of the cattle are affecting our property values." Property values. There it was. Belle had managed to persuade them that my ranch, which had existed for over a century before their subdivision was even conceived, was somehow diminishing their investment. The woman was constructing a multi-pronged legal assault, manufacturing the illusion of widespread community dissent. But her most significant escalation came 3 days later, and it was a masterstroke of manipulation. I was inspecting fence lines when my phone buzzed. It was the sheriff's dispatch, reporting a domestic disturbance call with possible threats of violence. A knot formed in my stomach. The address was mine. Deputy Collins showed up within minutes, his body camera recording, his demeanor tense. "Garrett, we received a call about you threatening a neighbor. A lady claims you became hostile during a discussion about property lines. She implied physical violence." "Which lady?" "Belle Thornwick. She says you warned her to stay off your land or else and made menacing gestures." I nearly laughed, nearly. Collins was dead serious, and in today's climate such accusations can stick, even when they are entirely baseless. But I remembered the advice my attorney had repeatedly given me during my divorce. Always remain composed with law enforcement, never become defensive, and if you possess evidence, present it in a professional manner. "Deputy, I have security cameras that cover every square inch of my property. When exactly did this supposed threat take place?" Collins consulted his notes. "Yesterday at approximately 4:00 p.m., near your eastern fence line." I took out my phone and opened the cloud storage application. "Let's review the footage." The video was perfect. It showed Belle approaching my fence, with me calmly explaining the property boundaries from a distance of 15 feet. Speaking in a normal, conversational tone, it then showed her shouting at me about rural terrorism and making threats against the community. Finally, it showed me walking away without ever raising my voice or making any gestures that could be remotely interpreted as threatening. Collins watched the entire recording, shaking his head. "Ma'am clearly has a problem with the truth," he remarked, making notes in his report. "But Garrett, you should be aware that she is filing for a restraining order. She claims you have a history of aggressive behavior toward residents of the subdivision. A restraining order, it was a brilliant move, actually. Even if it were to be dismissed, the mere act of filing would create a legal record suggesting I was dangerous, unstable, and the aggressor in this conflict, her husband's law firm. A major conflict of interest she had conveniently failed to disclose, was likely advising her on every move, but documentation was a game two could play. I had been studying Montana property law since our first confrontation, learning everything I could about homestead rights, water law, and harassment statutes. It turns out that filing false police reports is a felony, punishable by up to 2 years in prison. Each false report constitutes a separate criminal offense, and the pattern of harassment I was documenting could be used to support a civil suit for damages, including attorney's fees and harm to my reputation. My counterattack was swift and precise. First, I filed my own harassment complaint, backed by 47 documented incidents over a 6-month period. Every instance of trespassing, every false accusation, every attempt to harm my business relationships was time-stamped and supported by photographic evidence. Then, I retained McKenzie & Associates, the top water rights attorneys in the state. It cost me $5,000 up front, but they confirmed my suspicions. My 1887 homestead patent granted me absolute water rights under the federal prior appropriation doctrine. No HOA, no county, and no state agency could supersede those rights without due process and just compensation. The insurance ploy was Bell's next manipulative masterpiece. My liability insurance provider called on Thursday morning. "Mr. Holloway, we've received a claim concerning your property. It's alleged that it constitutes an attractive nuisance. The HOA is insisting that you cover the cost of additional security patrols for their subdivision. Furthermore, they are demanding a community access easement to your lake. They are threatening to file a lawsuit if you do not comply." Attractive nuisance is a legal term for a property feature that might entice people, particularly children, into dangerous situations, like an unfenced swimming pool. However, my lake was clearly marked with no trespassing signs and monitored by security cameras. Hardly an open invitation to the public. Initially, the insurance company sided with Bell. Their main goal was to avoid a lawsuit, not to protect my rights. They threatened to increase my rates unless I resolved the community's concerns amicably. But there was something they were unaware of. Those security cameras had captured something remarkable. Tucker's latest Instagram post, in which he boasted about earning $47,000 in 3 months from charging for exclusive lake access. He had unintentionally documented the commercial exploitation of my property, providing irrefutable proof that any attractive nuisance was a result of his own illegal business activities. Sometimes, the most effective defense is to let your adversaries hang themselves with their own rope. Bell's desperation became apparent when she contacted Channel 7 News with a sob story about a wealthy rancher bullying working-class families. I was mending fence posts when my daughter, Skylar, called from college, her voice strained with worry. "Dad, you're on the evening news. Some woman is claiming you're threatening families and blocking public access to a lake. They're showing aerial footage of our property." The segment aired that night. Ranch owner denies lake access to community children. Bell had orchestrated the perfect photo opportunity, with crying children in swimsuits standing at my fence line, holding signs that read, "Let us swim," and "Stop rural bullying." The reporter swallowed every word, portraying me as some corporate agricultural villain who was denying innocent families their traditional recreational rights. But what truly revealed Bell's escalating panic was the GoFundMe page. She created Save Public Lake Access, legal defense against corporate intimidation. She had managed to raise $12,000 in just 2 days, asserting that she needed the funds to combat my army of lawyers and safeguard community rights. The comment section was vicious. People from all over the country were calling me a greedy bastard, threatening to boycott Montana beef, and demanding that the governor seize my property for public use. Death threats began to appear in my email and on Facebook Messenger. That week, 3 local businesses terminated their contracts with me. The feed store, the veterinary clinic, and even the mechanic who had been servicing my equipment for 15 years. It was a form of economic warfare, intended to pressure me into submission, but Bell's most malevolent escalation was an act of pure sabotage. On Saturday morning, my water pump system experienced a catastrophic failure. It was 80-year-old equipment, and it seemed to have finally given out, until I discovered the severed electrical lines and the smashed control panel concealed behind the pump house. The repairs would cost $8,000, and my cattle were left without water during the hottest week of the summer. The security cameras had captured shadowy figures moving near the pump house at 2 a.m. on Friday night, but they were wearing hoodies and kept their faces obscured. It was a clever move, but not clever enough to prevent them from leaving tire tracks in the mud. A distinctive tread pattern that matched Tucker's lifted pickup truck. Sheriff Collins conducted an investigation but found insufficient evidence for criminal charges. It's remarkable how quickly law enforcement standards can shift when political pressure is applied. Bell's husband served on the county hospital board alongside Collins's wife. It was likely a coincidence, I'm sure, but every action has a reaction, and I had been studying more than just property law. My daughter, Skylar, a journalism major with her mother's investigative talents, began to look into Bell's past while I was dealing with the repairs. What she uncovered was explosive. Bell had been terminated from her previous real estate position for falsifying property documents. Online client reviews accused her of swindling elderly sellers with forged paperwork and exorbitant fees. Even better, Bell's husband's bank was under a federal audit for questionable lending practices. This was the same bank that held the construction loans for the subdivision and the mortgages for most of the residents. If that institution were to fail, the property values in Whispering Pines would plummet overnight. Meanwhile, Tucker's Instagram empire was sowing the seeds of its own downfall. His invitation to a Free the Lake party went viral, with 200 confirmed attendees for a peaceful protest to reclaim community water rights. However, in influencer terminology, peaceful protest translates to a drunken invasion complete with professional photography gear. They descended like a swarm of locusts on Saturday night. Cars were parked along the county road for half a mile. Strangers tramped across my pastures, carrying coolers, camping equipment, and enough camera gear to produce a feature film. The scent of marijuana smoke blended with barbecue charcoal as they established their camp on my lakeshore like a conquering army. The party raged until 3:00 a.m., with fireworks being launched over the water where my grandmother's ashes lay. The electronic music drowned out the sounds of the night, which had remained unchanged for generations. When the sun rose to reveal the extent of the damage, I felt sick to my stomach. There were trampled fence lines, scattered cattle, and a grass fire, started by Roman candles, that had scorched 40 acres of prime pastureland. The volunteer fire department responded, along with sheriff's deputies and an ambulance for 3 cases of alcohol poisoning. The property damage amounted to $15,000, not including the ecological harm to the wetlands and nesting areas. The police arrested 3 partygoers for underage drinking, but Tucker and Bell had conveniently disappeared before they could be questioned. However, while I was assessing the fire damage the next morning, I discovered something that changed the entire situation. The bill for the county emergency services was addressed to my ranch. Not the subdivision. Every police call, every fire response, every ambulance trip to Whispering Pines was being billed to my property address. I began to go through old records, and the pattern was undeniable. For 5 years, every emergency service call intended to harass me had been paid for with my own tax dollars. Bell had been using my money to wage a war against me. But that revelation led to an even more significant discovery. In my grandfather's old filing cabinet, tucked away beneath decades of receipts for farm equipment, I found a folder labeled County Service District, 1962. Inside were documents that were about to completely turn the tables in this conflict, documents that proved I possessed a legal authority that Bell had never even imagined existed, documents that would empower me to dismantle her perfect suburban kingdom with a single phone call. That manila folder in my grandfather's filing cabinet held the ultimate weapon, one I never realized I had. The documents, yellowed by time, were embossed with official seals from 1962. They detailed the rural service district formation, Cedar Ridge County. My hands literally shook as I deciphered the legal text, because hidden within the bureaucratic language was the solution to everything. In the 1960s, Montana had established special districts to deliver municipal services to dispersed rural properties. My grandfather's ranch, being the most extensive landholding in the vicinity, was designated as the central parcel for the entire region's emergency services, road upkeep, and utilities coordination. But the crucial detail was this. The original agreement stipulated that the ranch owner automatically became the legal service district administrator. Endowed with extensive oversight authority, these powers were transferred with the ownership of the property, regardless of whether anyone remembered their existence. I was the district supervisor. I had been for 3 years. Since inheriting the ranch, and I had been completely oblivious. The legal implications were astounding. As the district administrator, I possessed the authority to approve or reject all municipal service contracts for the entire area. This included police patrols, fire department responses, emergency medical services, and even the maintenance of the subdivision's access roads. Everything required my signature. More importantly, I had the legal entitlement to audit all district expenses and to terminate contracts for valid reasons with 30 days' notice. My attorney confirmed everything on Monday morning, her voice practically buzzing with excitement. Garrett, this is entirely legitimate. The 1962 Rural Service District Act is still in effect. These powers were never rescinded or reassigned. You have been unwittingly funding services that mainly benefit the subdivision, while they have been using those very services to harass you. The financial ramifications were immense. The service district was financed through special property tax assessments based on acreage. My ranch contributed 60% of the total budget, approximately $200,000 per year, while the entire HOA subdivision collectively paid the other 40%. For 5 years, I had been bankrolling my own persecution, every police call Bell made to bother me, every emergency response to Tucker's illicit parties, every patrol car that arrived to intimidate me. All of it had been paid for with my tax money, but the most shocking revelation came when we scrutinized 20 years of the district's financial records. The spending patterns were nothing short of criminal. There were massive overcharges for security services from companies owned by the business partners of Bell's husband. The HOA had been billing the district for private amenities like pool maintenance, landscaping, clubhouse utilities, and even the lighting for their tennis courts. They had systematically plundered public funds to support their private lifestyle, assuming the country rancher would never notice or comprehend the complex bureaucratic scheme. I had discovered their vulnerability, and it was forged from pure greed. The technical aspects were elegantly simple. Montana Sunshine laws mandated complete transparency for all service district activities. I had the right to demand immediate access to every contract, every invoice, and every payment authorization from the last decade, and what I was poised to uncover would be sufficient to bring them all down. My authority extended to terminating contracts with 30 days written notice, auditing all expenditures for compliance, and reporting financial discrepancies to state and federal prosecutors. I could, in effect, cut off their access to police, fire, and emergency services while simultaneously demanding repayment for years of embezzlement. But the psychological leverage was even greater. For months, I had been on the defensive, reacting to Bell's assaults and documenting her harassment while she dictated the terms of the conflict. Now, I possessed the ultimate advantage, the power to legally dismantle her entire suburban empire with an authority she never knew I had. As I sat in my kitchen that evening, my coffee growing cold while I reviewed the documents for the 10th time, I realized this was no longer just about property. This was about seeking justice for every rural landowner who had been intimidated by entitled suburban newcomers, every rancher, farmer, or long-term resident who had witnessed new arrivals immediately demanding changes to suit their own preferences. Bell believed she was contending with an isolated country rancher with scarce resources and limited legal expertise. She had no inkling that she had initiated a war with someone who, in fact, controlled the very infrastructure that kept her perfect community operational. The service district administrator had been dormant for 3 years. It was time for him to awaken and assert some long-neglected authority. It was time to show an HOA president that rural does not mean powerless. It means being connected to legal and governmental systems that have existed for generations before her subdivision was ever conceived. On Monday morning, I convened an emergency session with my newly formed War Council, which consisted of my attorney, my accountant, and one highly enthusiastic journalism major, my daughter, who had driven down from college for the occasion. The conference room at Mackenzie & Associates had the aroma of leather and old legal volumes, the kind of place where fortunes are determined by the stroke of a pen. My attorney, Sarah Mackenzie, laid out the service district documents across the mahogany table like a set of battle plans. Garrett, these powers are exceptional. You have the ability to terminate every municipal service contract with 30 days' notice. But we must approach this with precision, document everything, adhere to all proper procedures, and make it impossible for them to challenge us on procedural grounds. My accountant and friend, Pete Morrison, who had guided me through my divorce and the inheritance of the ranch, was already immersed in the financial records, his calculator clicking away like a machine gun. Jesus Christ, Garrett, look at these figures. They've been billing the district $400,000 a year for enhanced security services. The market rate for the actual patrol coverage they received would be closer to $80,000. But the undeniable proof was Tucker's own social media, which documented his illicit earnings. $47,000 in 3 months from charging for lake access, plus an additional $32,000 from corporate sponsorships that used my property as a setting. All of it was recorded with timestamps, geolocation data, and his own commentary on his profit margins. Skylar had her laptop open, tracking social media activity and mapping out Bell's network. Dad, it gets even better. I found links between the security company that's overcharging you and your husband's bank. They share the same ownership group and business address. They've been operating a kickback scheme through municipal contracts. The strategy took shape over strong coffee and a shared sense of Montana resolve. It would be a 3-phase approach, each designed to exert maximum pressure while maintaining a legally unassailable position. Phase 1. Formal notification. I would assert my authority as district administrator to demand an immediate audit of all financial records, inform all parties of impending contract reviews, and firmly establish my legal standing before taking any further action. Phase 2. Systematic service termination. I would begin by cutting non-essential services, the costly security patrols, emergency landscaping, and special event coordination. This would allow them to feel the financial strain while essential safety services remained in place. Phase 3. Public confrontation. This would occur at the scheduled HOA meeting, where I would present the evidence of corruption to the full media, ensuring maximum embarrassment, legal exposure, and community impact. Sarah detailed how the sunshine laws would be our shield. Every service district meeting must be open to the public. All financial records are accessible under the Freedom of Information Act. Montana's transparency laws are among the most robust in the country. They won't be able to conceal their actions behind closed doors once you start demanding accountability. But I also remembered learning about civil forfeiture laws during my research. Property and assets involved in the commission of a crime can be seized by the authorities. If we could demonstrate that Tucker's truck was used for trespassing operations, or that Bell's house was acquired with embezzled money, we might be able to recover damages beyond simple repayment. Timing was of the essence. Tucker's largest Instagram event, a wilderness challenge sponsored by energy drink companies, was scheduled in 3 weeks. It was expected to draw 500 participants to his lake. This presented the perfect chance to document massive commercial trespassing while illustrating the necessity for immediate intervention. Pete would conduct a forensic audit of a decade's worth of service district expenditures, pinpointing every dubious transaction. Sarah would draft civil lawsuits for fraud, defamation, and conversion, while also filing criminal referrals with state and federal prosecutors. Skylar would liaise with an investigative journalist who was interested in stories of HOA abuse, timing the media coverage for the greatest possible effect. But we also needed allies. Montana politics is built on relationships, and Bell's husband's banking connections meant we needed backing from influential figures. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, my neighbor, Chuck Morrison, Pete's cousin, whose family had been ranching here since the 1920s. Mentioned that County Commissioner Janet Torres was seeking re-election issues that would appeal to rural voters. Janet has been under pressure from developers who want to rezone agricultural land, Chuck explained. She would welcome a high-profile case that shows she stands with long-standing families against suburban manipulation. Environmental organizations were another natural ally. The Montana Wilderness Society had been tracking the damage caused by social media to pristine ecosystems, documenting how Instagram tourism was harming fragile habitats. The commercialization of my lake was a perfect fit for their narrative. Even some residents of the subdivision were growing weary of Bell's antics. 3 families had privately approached Chuck, complaining about emergency assessments and questioning the HOA's financial management. They were ready to support transparency and accountability, especially if it meant lower fees. The psychological preparation was equally important. This was no longer just about winning. It was about establishing a precedent for rural property rights throughout the state. Every rancher, farmer, and longtime resident facing similar pressures would be observing the outcome of this case. As the meeting concluded, Sarah handed me a thick folder of legal documents. Garrett, you are about to become very well known. This case will be studied in law schools. Be prepared for that level of public attention. As I walked out to my truck, breathing in the mountain air that carried the scent of pine and possibility, I realized that a fundamental shift had occurred. For months, I had been reacting, defending, and documenting harassment while Belle controlled the narrative. Now, I held the weapons. It was time to go on the offensive. My initial move was delivered by certified mail on Tuesday morning. A formal letter to the HOA board declaring my authority as the Rural Service District Administrator and demanding an immediate financial audit of all municipal contracts. The letter was crafted with surgical precision. Effective immediately, all service district expenditures require administrator approval. Any unauthorized use of public funds for private subdivision amenities will be considered embezzlement under Montana Criminal Code Section 45-6-316. You have 30 days to provide complete financial records or face proceedings for service termination. I sent copies to the county commissioners, the state attorney general, the local media, and the FBI's white-collar crime division. It might have been overkill, but I wanted everyone to be watching when the first domino fell. Belle's reaction was immediate and utterly panicked, within hours. She had called for an emergency HOA meeting that very evening. Her email to the residents was a masterpiece of hysteria. Urgent. Rancher threatens community safety. Emergency action required. She alleged that I was making terrorist threats against their basic services, endangering children and the elderly through my rural extremism. But her true desperation was revealed when she reached out to the governor's office, according to my source in the county administration. Martinez's wife worked there. Belle had actually attempted to file a domestic terrorism report, claiming I was using my control over infrastructure to threaten the community's survival. The governor's staff reportedly laughed her out of the building. Meanwhile, she retained Pinnacle Crisis Management, a Seattle-based PR firm specializing in reputation damage control. This cost the HOA $37,000 for a 2-week contract, which she paid for with community funds without board approval, thus adding another charge of embezzlement to her growing list of offenses. The smear campaign began at once. Fake social media accounts started appearing on various platforms, posting negative reviews of my ranch and making false claims that I mistreated my animals, polluted waterways, and threatened my neighbors. Anonymous tips were sent to state agencies, the IRS, the EPA, animal control, and building inspectors, all alleging violations that would require costly investigations to refute. Tucker took his own performance to the next level, posting a tearful video in which he claimed I had threatened him with violence. This crazy rancher said he'd make me disappear if I didn't stop using the community lake. He sobbed, designer tears streaming down his face. I'm scared for my safety and for my family. It was a complete fabrication, but the video quickly went viral. Death threats began to pour in by the dozen. People were calling me a psychopath and demanding that the authorities arrest me before I completely lost control. The algorithm thrives on controversy, and Tucker was giving it exactly what it wanted. But while they were manufacturing drama online, I was methodically building my case. My attorney had filed for preliminary injunctions against any further harassment, supported by 47 documented instances of false reports. Each fabricated complaint constituted a separate criminal charge under Montana law. Filing false police reports carries a penalty of up to 2 years in prison, and the pattern we had established suggested an organized conspiracy. Pete's forensic audit was uncovering criminal activity that had been going on for years. The security company that was billing for $100,000 annually was owned by Belle's brother-in-law and provided services that were mostly fictitious. The actual number of patrol hours logged was less than 20% of the time billed. They had been stealing approximately $300,000 a year from public funds. The subdivision's landscaping, pool maintenance, and clubhouse utilities had all been fraudulently charged to the service district. Even the upgrade to their tennis court lighting was billed as emergency road illumination. It was a level of creative accounting that would have made Bernie Madoff envious, but Belle's most desperate act was pure sabotage. Intended to create an emergency that would justify her actions, on Thursday night, someone cut my fence lines in 3 different places, allowing my cattle to wander onto the county roads during rush hour. The sabotage was meticulously planned, with the cuts made in areas that were not visible to my security cameras. And timed to cause maximum chaos and danger, my phone began to buzz at 6:00 a.m. With frantic calls. 40 head of cattle were scattered across Highway 93, causing traffic jams and several near accidents. Sheriff's deputies, the highway patrol, and emergency services were all scrambling to manage the situation. The incident resulted in $12,000 in emergency roundup costs, plus the potential liability for any accidents that occurred. An anonymous call to dispatch claimed that I had deliberately released dangerous animals in retaliation for the community's opposition to my terrorist demands. It was the perfect narrative to support Bell's claims about my mental instability, but my security system had been upgraded to include motion sensors along the fence lines and infrared cameras in the blind spots. We captured everything. Tucker's lifted pickup truck, 3 figures in hoodies, and the deliberate sabotage of the fence posts, which were designed to fail under pressure. Even better, the audio recordings captured their conversation. "Make it look like the crazy rancher lost his shit," one of them said. "Bell wants this to look like he's dangerous." Sheriff Collins finally had irrefutable evidence of a criminal conspiracy. Tucker's friends were arrested within hours and charged with criminal mischief, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit property damage. Tucker managed to avoid arrest by claiming he wasn't there, but the GPS data from his truck told a different story. Bell's final, desperate act was to call a town hall meeting, where she claimed that my ranch operations were a threat to the community's survival and demanded that the county intervene through eminent domain proceedings. She had no idea that she was walking into her own public execution. The criminal charges brought against Tucker's fence-cutting accomplices ignited a community rebellion that Bell had not anticipated. 3 young people from the subdivision were arrested for felony property damage and were now facing up to 5 years in state prison. Their parents, decent individuals who had been swayed by Bell's deceptions, suddenly understood that their children had been enlisted in a criminal conspiracy by the very HOA president they had trusted. But Bell's reaction to this development only served to reveal the true extent of her corruption. She retained the services of criminal defense attorney Marcus Webb, charging his $60,000 retainer directly to the HOA's funds without any board authorization. When residents raised questions about this expenditure at the emergency meeting on Thursday, she asserted that it was appropriate to use community money to defend residents against rural aggression. The response was immediate and severe. Homeowners began to demand financial transparency, questioning years of inflated assessments and enigmatic security upgrades. 3 board members resigned rather than risk being held liable for Bell's unauthorized spending. Property values plummeted by 15% in 2 weeks as news of the ongoing legal disputes spread. Meanwhile, the documentation I had gathered was exposing a criminal operation that had been active for years. Pete's forensic audit had uncovered shell companies, kickback schemes, and a systematic pattern of theft that would have made an organized crime syndicate proud. The security firm that was billing $400,000 annually was owned by Bell's husband's business partners and provided services that were largely non-existent. They had managed to steal nearly $2 million over a period of 5 years. But the media war was intensifying, and Schuyler's connections in investigative journalism were proving invaluable. Channel 7's follow-up report included interviews with 3 families who had been coerced into signing false complaints against me. Elderly residents disclosed that Bell had threatened them with foreclosure proceedings through her husband's bank if they did not support her community safety initiatives. The reporter had also unearthed evidence of Tucker's tax evasion. IRS records revealed that he had earned over $200,000 from illegal lake access fees, while only reporting an income of $37,000 on his tax returns. Federal charges for tax fraud and unreported commercial activity were now imminent. Tucker's Instagram empire was crumbling under the weight of this scrutiny. His sponsors began to sever ties with him after learning about the allegations of trespassing and fraud. His follower count dropped dramatically as people realized that his family lake content was based on stolen property. Even his energy drink partnership canceled their Wilderness Challenge event. But Bell's most desperate act demonstrated that she had completely lost her grip on reality. She approached me privately on Saturday evening, finding me as I was repairing the fence damage from her sabotage operation. The overpowering scent of fear was palpable as she crossed my pasture in designer heels, her steps unsteady on the uneven ground, like a fish out of its element. "Garrett, we need to have a talk," she said, her voice trembling. "This situation has spiraled out of control." I continued with my work, allowing my body camera to record the entire exchange. "What is there to discuss? Bell, I can make all of this disappear. I'll give you $50,000 in cash if you drop the legal proceedings and allow Tucker to use the lake occasionally. Just for personal use, no more commercial activities." It was bribery, captured on camera, with audio. She had just handed me a federal felony conviction. You're offering to pay me with the very money you stole from my tax payments? Her composure finally shattered. Look, perhaps Tucker got a bit carried away with the business side of things, but you know how boys can be. And yes, there might have been some accounting discrepancies with the service district, but it was nothing malicious, just some misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. The theft of $2 million was a misunderstanding. I will resign from the HOA board. She went on, her desperation making her voice shrill. We'll sell the house, we'll move away. We will never trouble you again. Just please, don't ruin our lives over some insignificant lake. Some insignificant lake, the place where 4 generations of my family were buried, where my grandmother's ashes lay, where my great-grandfather had built our first home with his bare hands. She still failed to grasp the significance of what she had attempted to take. But her attempt at a negotiation revealed a critical piece of information. She was aware that the federal investigation was closing in. Her husband's bank was now facing criminal charges for loan fraud and money laundering. The house they had purchased with stolen funds was about to be seized through civil forfeiture. Their idyllic suburban existence was collapsing around them. The service termination notices I had issued were creating the exact kind of pressure I had intended. Police patrols for the subdivision were now billed at the market rate of $180,000 annually, a stark contrast to the $30,000 they had been paying. Emergency services now required either prepayment or private insurance coverage. Road maintenance had become the responsibility of the HOA, at a cost of $85,000 per year. The emergency assessment notices arrived in mailboxes on Monday morning, demanding $3,200 from each household to cover the actual costs of these services. The majority of residents were unable to afford this sudden increase, which plunged the entire community into a financial crisis that threatened its very survival. The emergency HOA meeting on Tuesday was standing room only, with angry homeowners demanding answers about years of financial mismanagement. Several residents announced their intention to sue Bell personally for the recovery of the stolen funds. Others were exploring legal avenues to dissolve the HOA entirely rather than face bankruptcy as a result of her corruption. But the ideal setting for the final showdown was already on the calendar. The county commissioner's public hearing on service district management, scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m., all parties were required to present their evidence and testimony with full media access and public record documentation. It was time to bring this war to an end, once and for all, on Thursday afternoon. The Cedar Ridge County Commissioner's meeting room was filled well beyond its fire code limit. The presence of local TV crews, newspaper reporters, and live streaming cameras had transformed the typically quiet government chamber into a media frenzy. The air was thick with a mixture of nervous sweat, stale coffee, and the scent of leather-bound law books, creating an atmosphere of intense anticipation. I was seated at the front table with Sarah Mackenzie, our evidence meticulously organized in color-coded binders that were substantial enough to stop a bullet. On the opposite side of the aisle, Belle was huddled with her high-priced legal team. 3 attorneys from Billings who had driven down for what they likely presumed would be a routine exercise in damage control. The gallery was divided, resembling a wedding that had gone terribly wrong. On the left were ranchers, longtime residents, and environmental advocates, all there to support property rights. On the right were the residents of the subdivision, most of whom appeared bewildered and furious about the emergency assessments they could not afford. At the back of the room, Skylar was live-streaming the entire event for her journalism project. Commissioner Janet Torres called the hearing to order, her voice cutting sharply through the low murmur of the crowd. We are here today to address the allegations concerning the Rural Service District's financial management and administrative authority. Mr. Holloway, as the complainant, you may begin. I rose to my feet slowly, feeling the weight of 4 generations of my family watching over me. Commissioners, what I am about to present to you constitutes the most significant case of municipal fraud in the history of Cedar Ridge County. The first piece of evidence I presented was my service district documentation, the yellowed papers from 1962 that established my legal authority as the administrator. For 3 years, I unknowingly possessed budgetary oversight for every municipal service in this region. These were powers that Mrs. Thornwick exploited to embezzle nearly $2 million in public funds. Bell's lead attorney attempted to intervene. Objection, Your Honor. This is not a trial, counselor, Torres retorted. Mr. Holloway has the floor. I then proceeded to the financial analysis, letting the numbers tell a story that was more compelling than any words could be. My ranch is responsible for 60% of this district's budget, which amounts to approximately $200,000 annually. Those funds were systematically misappropriated to subsidize private amenities for the subdivision through fraudulent contracts. The evidence was presented in a mounting display, like exhibits at a war crimes trial. Security contracts billing $400,000 for services that were only worth $80,000. Landscaping fees for private HOA property that were disguised as emergency road maintenance. Pool chemicals and tennis court lighting that were charged as public safety infrastructure. But the true bombshell was the evidence from Tucker's social media. Mrs. Thornwick's son documented his own criminal activities, earning over $200,000 by selling access to my private property, all while evading federal taxes. Every Instagram post, every commercial transaction, every sponsored event was a theft of my family's heritage. The audio recordings were played through the chamber's sound system with perfect clarity. Tucker boasting about his profit margins to his film crew. Bell coaching false statements for police reports. The fence-cutting conspiracy captured on infrared video, with their own voices providing the narration. Your Honor, I stated, my voice resounding through the silent room. They did not just steal my land. They stole my family's legacy and sold it back to strangers for the sake of Instagram content. The decisive moment came when I revealed the bribery attempt. The recording of Bell's offer to pay me $50,000 for my silence was played over the speakers, her admission of accounting irregularities echoing off the chamber walls, the sound of her designer heels stumbling across my pasture. The desperation in her voice as she realized her suburban kingdom was collapsing filled the room. Commissioner Torres leaned forward, her expression as hard as granite. Mrs. Thornwick, do you have a response to these allegations? Bell's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but she pushed him aside and rose to her feet. Her voice was as shaky as autumn leaves. These are all just misunderstandings, accounting errors, perhaps some miscommunication about service boundaries. We never had any intention. Mrs. Thornwick, Torres cut in. We have just listened to recordings of you offering bribes and admitting to financial irregularities. This is well beyond a simple miscommunication. The testimony from the community was damning. Chuck Morrison recounted similar attempts at harassment on neighboring ranches. 3 elderly residents of the subdivision testified about the pressure tactics and threats of foreclosure they had endured. Environmental scientist Dr. Rebecca Martinez documented the ecological damage caused by the commercial exploitation of the lake, presenting before and after photographs that drew gasps from the audience. But the most impactful moment came from an unexpected quarter. Margaret Henderson, the neighbor who had been coerced into signing false complaints, stood up, tears streaming down her face. We put our trust in her, Margaret said, her voice breaking. Bell told us that Garrett was dangerous, that our property values would plummet if we didn't take action. She threatened us with foreclosure through her husband's bank if we didn't support her. We were absolutely terrified. The commissioner's vote was unanimous on every motion. Terminate all HOA service contracts pending a full investigation. Refer all financial irregularities to state and federal prosecutors. Support my authority as district administrator and commend my efforts in exposing municipal corruption. Sheriff Collins announced that criminal investigations were underway for embezzlement, conspiracy, tax evasion, and filing false reports. The FBI's white-collar crime unit was taking over the financial aspects of the case. Tucker was now facing federal charges for tax fraud and commercial trespassing. As the media swarmed the exits, Bell attempted to slip out through a side door, only to be confronted by a crowd of angry subdivision residents demanding answers about their emergency assessments. Her perfect suburban facade had been shattered in 2 hours of documented truth. The headline in Friday's newspaper captured it all. HOA president arrested in massive fraud scheme. Rural service. District corruption exposed. 6 months later, justice felt like the taste of morning coffee on my porch as I watched the sunrise illuminate the lake, where my family's legacy would never be under threat again. Bell received a sentence of 18 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay $400,000 in restitution. Tucker was given community service, 5 years of probation, and a lifetime prohibition from monetizing any social media content. His 3 accomplices in the fence-cutting incident served 6 months in the county jail and were also required to pay restitution for the property damage. The outcome of the civil lawsuit was even more satisfying. $500,000 in damages, plus the seizure of Tucker's truck and the camera equipment he had used in his trespassing operations. The proceeds from the sale of Belle's house were placed in escrow, and her husband's bank collapsed under a federal investigation, taking their remaining assets with it. But the money was not the true victory. The real triumph was justice. The new HOA leadership issued a public apology at a crowded community meeting, establishing the Holloway Accord, a formal acknowledgement of historic ranch operations and a permanent safeguard against any future interference. They replaced Belle's cronies with decent individuals who understood that rural communities thrive on cooperation, not colonization. Access to the lake for Tucker's purposes was permanently prohibited by a court order, with any violations resulting in automatic felony charges. Commercial activity on my property was now a federal crime, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. The ecosystem began to recover almost at once, waterfowl returned, and the invasive weeds that had been introduced by Instagram tourists started to die off. The natural equilibrium that my great-grandfather had so carefully preserved was restored. I used the recovered funds to establish the Rural Heritage Protection Fund, which provides legal aid to landowners facing similar instances of HOA abuse. Within 6 months, we had assisted 47 families across Montana in defending their property rights. Against suburban encroachment, the fund grew to over $2 million as contributions came in from ranchers, farmers, and rural residents throughout the country who had fought and won their own battles against entitled developers. The scholarship program for agricultural students became a source of personal pride for me. In its first year, 12 students from ranching families received full college funding, with priority given to those pursuing studies in land management, environmental science, and agricultural law. Skylar changed her major to investigative journalism, inspired by our struggle and resolved to expose rural injustice wherever she encountered it. But the broader effects of our case surpassed all my expectations. The Montana legislature enacted the Rural Property Rights Protection Act, which strengthened the oversight of service districts and mandated transparency in municipal contracting. Financial abuse by HOAs was reclassified as a felony, with mandatory minimum sentences. The legislation was informally dubbed the Bell Bill in honor of our case. National property rights organizations began to use our documentation as educational material, teaching rural landowners how to research their legal authorities and defend themselves against harassment. The story was featured in legal textbooks, agricultural journals, and documentary films about land rights in America. A year later, we held the first annual Rural Heritage Days Festival, which drew 5,000 visitors to celebrate agriculture, conservation, and community cooperation. The event highlighted sustainable ranching practices, environmental protection, and the economic advantages of collaborating with longtime residents rather than opposing them. Tucker's former Instagram followers were now learning about responsible land stewardship, wildlife conservation, and the real effort required to preserve Montana's natural beauty. The lake was transformed into an educational site where university students could study ecosystem restoration and sustainable recreation. Management, the local businesses that had boycotted me during Belle's smear campaign came back with apologies and renewed contracts. The manager of the feed store confessed that he had been pressured by threats to his bank loan, which was held by Belle's husband's institution. A clear case of economic terrorism, but we had not only survived. We had thrived, standing by the lake last weekend, watching my daughter teach environmental science students about watershed protection. I thought about my great-grandfather, Augustus. He had homesteaded this land with nothing more than his determination and the legal documents that established his rights. A century later, those same documents had safeguarded his legacy against suburban colonizers who believed that money and political influence could override law and justice. The water lapped against the stones where Grandma Eleanor's ashes were scattered, carrying memories and wisdom on to future generations. Meadowlarks sang across the pastures, where the cattle grazed in peace, no longer disturbed by Instagram tourists and commercial exploitation. Sometimes, bullies start fights they are not equipped to win. My grandfather always said that the land teaches patience, but it also teaches justice. When someone attempts to steal your heritage, you don't just fight back. You ensure that they can never inflict the same harm on anyone else. Share your own HOA nightmare in the comments. You may have more power at your disposal than you realize. And be sure to hit that subscribe button, because next week, I'll be sharing the story of how a retired teacher brought down an entire corrupt school board using nothing but a calculator and public records requests. The land endures, justice prevails, and Montana ranchers never back down from bullies who mistake kindness for weakness. Thanks for joining us on End for HOA. We're the HOA. Karens finally meet their match. If the story had you cheering or cringing, please like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you'll be ready for the next wild HOA tale.